Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. There's an awful lot of you here, so yeah, thank you all for jumping on with us this morning. Good morning to our clients, first and foremost. Hello to you all. There's a lot of you on the call today. Good morning to all the other businesses that have joined us, some great names on here, and good morning to all the fellow agency people that have jumped on today as well. My name's Adam. I'm on the commercial team here at Impression. I've stuck into the office to steal the good Wi-Fi, and I'll be running the session today. And yeah, hoping the webinar software is kind to me. I'm joined by Charlie and Greg, two of my colleagues from the Impression team here. We're an SEO, paid media, and CRO agency. Hopefully you already knew that, because that's what we're going to talk about today. Charlie will be talking about and discussing the core web vitals, which is a big trend in the world of tech SEO, a big emerging trend, and something that we think is going to be pretty important as we move into 2021. He's going to hand over to Greg after that from our paid media team. Greg's going to be taking a wider look at 2021 from a paid media perspective and discussing how to future-proof your paid media strategy. We're also delighted to be joined by Payal from Google. Payal is going to be taking a look back at 2020 from a purely digital marketing perspective and nothing else, thank God, and looking forward herself to what 2021 might have in store. And that's the theme for today, really, a preview of 2021. I think marketing specialists, marketing agencies kind of trot this content out every year. It's a done thing to kind of look forward to the next year. It's quite easy stuff to do normally, but I think this year, as all the adverts on TV have been saying now more than ever, it is really important to have a good strategy moving forward and locked in place into 2021. There's going to be headwinds and tailwinds as we move into the next year. There's obviously the Brexit word looming over us, which no one knows what's going to happen or what that really means. It's the last time I'm going to say that word today, but I don't expect it to be entirely positive for businesses, and that's something that we're all going to have to contend with. But in terms of tailwinds, there's we have a date. There's light at the end of the tunnel from the pandemic, and as we look towards Easter 2021, we hope, based on yesterday's news, to be out the other side of this, and we do expect that to have, hopefully a positive impact on consumer spending and business spending. A bit of a feel-good factor, and there needs to be a strategy in place to capitalize on that, which should have a good impact. E-commerce has seen huge relative growth over the period of lockdown and the pandemic, and we expect that behavior to endure. There's studies to show that big global events, pandemics, recessions bring about changes in behavior which endure post those events, and we expect that to happen here as well. So yeah, with all that in mind, as I said, what we're going to be doing today is looking forward to next year and kind of asking the right questions and hopefully giving you some useful insight to help you put that strategy in place and move forward into next year for success. So yeah, first of all, Charlie's going to take us away with the SEO side of things, so I'll hand over to him first.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction, Adam. Hello from sunny Nottingham. So I'm Charlie, here to talk to you today about the core vitals and the upcoming update. So a little bit about me first. Yeah, name's Charlie. About a background as a web developer, so that's given me a real kind of passion for web performance. I work at Impression as a technical SEO consultant. I work for some of our biggest clients right through to kind of some of the small local providers who install Windows in the local area. The reason why I mention that is that no matter what size of client they are, all of them have spoke to me about the core web vitals. So I think it's something really important for no matter what size your business is. It's something that is going to have to be taken into account. So hopefully today I'll be able to give you a really good explanation of that. So the core web vitals, what are they? So the core web vitals are a subset of a set of metrics announced alongside them. So they're called page experience metrics. Really nice graph on the right to illustrate how they're made up. So at the top, you have the 3 core web vitals, and then underneath that, you have the 4 other signals which make up page experience. So they're mobile friendly, safe browsing, HTTPS, and no intrusive interstitials. Now, probably most sites, I think now, are doing those bottom 4 really well. Most people have mobile-friendly sites, safe browsing. Most people don't have malware on the sites. Sites are always secure now, but by and large. And if you do have intrusive interstitials, that's something you don't have a penalty against. So really, for these page experience metrics, the 3 new ones which I think people will be focused on are these core web vitals. So that's why they're really important. So what are they? The core web vitals is made up of 3 different metrics. So there's LCP, which is larger contentful paint, that measures loading speed. FID, first input delay, measures interactivity. And CLS, which is cumulative layout shift, I should say that, which measures visual stability of the page. So diving into those metrics a bit more, what are they? So LCP measures the biggest thing that's loaded in on initial viewport. So really good, Google have got a really good example of how to illustrate this. So this is from the CNN mobile site. It's a story about the election. You can see there it's how the site loads in. So the first image is the first contentful paint. So that's the first contentful thing that's loading the page. You see it's the breadcrumb at the top, the visual storage part. Then as the page loads, you can see it's picking up, it's highlighting the largest part of the browser. Right until the last slide, you can see the bit that's being measured as a larger contentful paint is when the image of the present-to-be loads in. Now, this is important for SEOs because previously we were focused on FCP as a metric, but now it seems that LCP has been submitted to Google and measure as kind of how fast the site is. So it's important to differentiate between those 2. It has to be either an image video or an image tag, and it has to be a block level HTML element, so it can't be something weird like a spam tag. FID, now this is a video, but I don't think it's going to play. Is it playing? I don't think it is. No. So this measures a page responsiveness. Now, what that means by responsiveness is when you go away, when a page is loading in, if you either scroll, click, or do a key press, is how much time the browser takes to respond to that click because it's doing other things. I will say that this metric, out of all the ones I've tested and all the sites I've looked at, this always seems to be right in the high percentage of most sites are okay. So I don't think it's one of the main focuses of Core Web Vitals in terms of kind of our SEO strategies. CLS, cumulative layout shift. So this measures the sum of all the layout shift when a page loads in, has like a score behind it. Layout shift score equals impact fraction by distance fraction. Luckily, we don't have to use that. It's all done by a computer, and then you get a score that comes out the other side. So a really good way to illustrate this is another example from Google. So on the left-hand side, you can see someone's loaded in a web page in a browser. They've tried to click on a lovely image of a dog, but then suddenly, as they tried to click on the image of the dog, a banner's loaded in, and then they've gone to a wrong page, or they've gone to an ad, or gone to a different category. Now it shifted the layout. Someone's clicked on the wrong thing. So that adds a certain amount of layout shift to that page. You can see that has a layout shift score of 0.44. Now on the right-hand side, an example of where layout shift, that same page where layout shift isn't occurring. So they've made space for that banner, and someone straight away has seen the space that banner's already made. So they've clicked on the picture of the dog. That dog hasn't moved, so there's no layout shift. That's a really easy way to explain layout shift, but I think it's a really good way to illustrate its unexpected movements on a page while it's throughout its whole entire lifespan. So we know what they are and how they work, but now we need to work out why they're important for us, especially as SEOs. So going back to 2018, Google announced an update called the Speed Update in capitals in January, and they rolled that out in July. So this was the first time that SEOs kind of thought, okay, right, it's time to really focus on the speed of our websites. And I know kind of one of the first things I did was went away and started auditing lots of sites, making sure they're fast. But actually, the devil in the detail here that update only affected mobile on the very first of websites, which is only a couple of % of overall searches. So actually, whilst it was a push towards these kind of page speed metrics of maybe being a bit more of a ranking factor, it didn't really have a huge impact. And I know that anecdotally, a lot of the page speed in work I've done hasn't resulted in direct ranking increases. So up until today, they announced the Core Web Vitals as part of the page experience metrics, and Core Web Vitals have speed very much at the front and center of them. And now in May 2021, they're going to be rolled in to be part of the algorithm. So what we need to make sure is that now, knowing that before it was a very small factor on a small percentage of clicks, this page experience signal is going to be a large kind of ranking signal. We're going to have to make sure Core Web Vitals are part of that. It is also important to note that if you do focus all your time on Core Web Vitals and your site isn't mobile friendly, then you're not, you can have a really fast LCP, but if your site isn't HTTP secure or mobile friendly, then you're still going to fail those metrics. So it's important to measure all of them, not just the Core Web Vitals. So we know why they're important. Now, how do we go away and measure them? So one of the first parts is Search Console. So Search Console, any account you're validated against, you can go in open up the tab, and Google have added a really nice enhancement tab, which is underneath the enhancement tab called Core Web Vitals. You click onto that, and it splits it out into mobile and desktop. So you can see on the two different devices, it gives you a selection of URLs and kind of any issues with them. You can drill further down into that. So here for the impression site, I've gone into where we have an LCP that's longer than 2.5 seconds. So this is where I think Search Console maybe falls down a little bit, where it only gives you a sample of URLs and it actually groups similar URLs. So you can see there that 462 URLs all have the same average LCP, which really, if we think of those 462 URLs, there's going to be a massive amount of templates there. You could have contact forms, categories, blogs that all use different sets of code. So whilst it groups them together as similar issues, I think this is more a place to benchmark your score rather than actually go and have that kind of real detailed look into it. Page speed insights. So we know what page speed insights is. You can go away, test individual URLs to get these scores. It has been updated with the Core Vitals, which is great. But there's one really important thing with page speed insights is to make sure to differentiate between field data and lab data. So looking at that test on the right for the impression homepage, you can see at the top, there's the field data. So field data comes from real world users that are using Google Chrome, sending data back to Google's big database they have called the Chrome User Experience Report. So that top one field data is your real users. So that's the best information. But important to note that probably if you go away and test some really niche pages, like a product that doesn't get a lot of traffic, you won't get the field data for it. You only get the lab data. So the lab data underneath is lab data that's run on a lighthouse test on your computer. So that's not real world data, but it still is, it does give you some metrics to work against. But it's really important to know the differences between that. I know it's tripped me up a few times when I'm working with them. Another thing with page speed insights to be really careful with is the difference between desktop and mobile. So I've tested a homepage of a site here. You can see on desktop that homepage scored 83. On mobile, that got 18. Now, the way that Google do the mobile tests is they use a Moto G4, which is quite an old phone, and they use a slow 4G connection, which really probably doesn't represent a lot of the users that realistically access websites now, because people have fast phones and people are, especially the advent of 5G internet connections are getting fast. So I think you have to be careful when you take those mobile scores. So it can look like the sky's falling, but actually it isn't that bad. So a really nice way to illustrate that is if you look at the field data for the mobile score, the largest contentful pane is 3.4 seconds. So that's just over the threshold of where they think needs improvement. That's a fairly okay score. But if you go and look at the lab data for the mobile score, that largest contentful pane is 11.1 seconds. So that's 3 times as bad. So you could look at that. If you did this on a niche product page that didn't have the field data available, you could think, okay, we've got a really bad problem with our mobile site score. But actually, by looking at kind of some of the actual real world field data, we'd know that isn't a true score. So you have to be really careful when using this tool. And I think it's just important to make sure you get as many data sources as possible when using page speed insights. Deep crawl, so there's lots of the crawling software available, but deep crawl is one that we use at Impression. So the crawling software is now being updated where they have the ability to do these metrics when they do that initial crawl. So deep crawl, if you enable JavaScript rendering, it'll actually go through en masse and pull out all of the pages that might have a slow LCP or some CLS issues. This is really nice for doing it at scale because you can see some of those tools before are quite manual to go through and get kind of large page speed metrics. Chrome User Experience Report, so this is my absolute favorite. So Chrome User Experience Report is Google's huge database of all real-world speed data that can be accessed through the cloud using BigQuery or Google Data Studio. Now, they've created this dashboard. You can click on that link there to access it, and it's this really nice Google Data Studio dashboard that pulls through all of the user metrics for the Core Web Vitals. So you can see on the right there, it's pulled through mobile and phone between LCP, FID, and CLS. So a great place to start to go and get some real world user data. And it is your whole entire domain, so you can't do it page by page level, but it's a good way to start to get some initial thoughts. Chrome Developer Tools. In Chrome Developer Tools, you can go in, open up a page, run a performance test, and you can actually go into that performance test. And by using the timings tab, you can start to see which elements are being used as the LCP. So this is a really good way. Say if you have 10 templates and you want to work out, okay, which of these templates have an LCP issue or ones I want to know what needs to load in fast to get an LCP, this is the way to go and do it. Go and use Chrome Developer Tools. As well as that, Chrome Developer Tools is really good for testing CLS. So when you run a Lighthouse test, you can actually expand the dropdown called Avoid Large Layout Shifts, and it will start to tell you which elements are being used, which elements are causing that layout shift. So if you think, okay, that page is a huge CLS, this is that extra step to go away and start to understand what is causing that CLS rather than just looking at a metric. Okay, so we know what the common issue, we know what how to measure them, we know what they are. So let's look at some common issues. So Impression recently carried out a study looking at top publishers around the world and seeing how they're doing for Core Web Vitals. We released this really nice asset that we're basically trying to measure those top publishers and how they're performing. And I think there's a few common issues that I found when looking through that. So the first one is Liquip. Sorry for butchering the French language, but these have a really poor CLS and LCP. So I've taken some screenshots of how that page loads in. So 1, 2, 3, you can see in the first image they load in the nav. The second image, they start to load in a list of links. And in the third image, they overwrite that list of links with the cookie policy and the main banner image. So that shifts the layout. If you wanted to click one of those links, you wanted to click that. And as well as that, the image for the LCP comes in right at the end. So you can see that that page might load fast, but the order they're loading it in is causing layout shift and a slow LCP. So that's definitely something you want to look at. Metro.news. So this is an interesting one that where the score was being artificially inflated because they were using animation. So actually the LCP wasn't being measured until that fade in animation was completed. You can see there in the second image, they use a fade. So the page is loading, but that fade was about 400 milliseconds, and that was adding time to the overall LCP. So that's definitely something that sites might have to look at, not using fades or animation, because it's going to take a while for things, you're adding to those metrics that we're speaking about. South China Morning Post, these smash CLS, so you can see that they make a space for that advert, so nothing's moving around. But what they do have is the same issue as Metro.news, where because that image is blurred and then coming out of the blur, the LCP is being measured when that blur is finished, but actually the image is already loaded. So I think, you have to think about these kind of animations to make the site look nicer. Are they going to cause some issues further down the line? Really good example as well. It's not just looking at the metrics, it's also understanding where traffic's coming from and is that causing any issues. So we had a client that's their LCP started to fall off a cliff suddenly in 1 month. We started to think, okay, what's wrong with that? We went and looked at the traffic, and actually what was causing that is that a piece of content they wrote, it's a parenting forum, started to rank really well in Australia. And then that means that lots of people were accessing that from Australia, but it wasn't running through a CDN, meaning that it took a long time to get that data. What that meant is that those scores started to come down because the LCP was taking such an amount of time to go back, to Australia and come back to the UK. So actually what we'd recommend there is that, if they are going to keep servicing Australian users, they need to make sure that they're, using a CDN to give them the fast experience as possible. I think this is a really nice way, a good way to illustrate why these core vitals are quite good, because it's there for the user and their experience. So those using Australia are real users for your site. I think it's really good that it will focus on them as well. So now a little bit of how I approach the auditing process, and I think this isn't by no means one size fits all, but I think it's a good place to get started. So first, get the Core Web Vitals dashboard created. Everyone should do that. Anyone with a site now, I'd recommend going and doing it. So on the right-hand side, we can see this website in particular has some issues with cumulative layout shift and desktop. So from there, I'll go and start digging into that a bit more. So in this dashboard, we can see that in February 2020, something happened to the site where that CLS and desktop got a lot worse. So we would say to the developer, first things first, what changed on the site at that time? So that's the first thing I'd do, actually go and understand the change that it made to that site and try and work out where some of these issues started to crop up. Second, benchmark each template. So go away, use PageSpeed Insights. Because Chrome User Experience Report is domain as a whole, make sure you're going in and looking at each template to measure how they're performing. So I've done a rudimentary example here, but for homepage, category, blog, and product, we can see that the category and blog, their LCP is fairly good, but actually the homepage LCP is quite slow. So maybe want to focus on that template and understand why that's the case. Investigate, so use Chrome developer tools to understand where the issues are coming from. So another example on the right of where a site's loading in the LCP right at the end of the load rather than the start and has some layout shift occurring. I think this is a really good way to illustrate, by using screenshots, illustrate to developers where those issues are coming from. So after investigating, you want to be able to make sure you send developers detailed recommendations. So by going that extra step, not just sending them a metric saying your LCP is not good, showing them actually why it's not performing well, give them examples across some templates, show them that that's the best way to start to get those things fixed. As well as that measure, so refer back to the report constantly to identify progress. So this is an example of where we improved the LCP for a site. You can see in February 2020, we did some changes. Great, that green bar went up. Everyone loves a green bar going up. One of the really nice things about this is a really good way to show a tech SEO win, which I think is always quite difficult to be able to show things like that. Like we fixed those 404s isn't very interesting, but being able to share a dashboard where green's going up is always nice for an SEO to be able to do. So that's a kind of a brief tour through Core Web Vitals. I think some of the key takeaways are they're coming in May 2021, so make sure you start preparing. Use as many data sources as possible when you're measuring. go to the extra step and understand what's causing the poor scores behind the metric. So, really make sure you're providing good recommendations and have a detailed understanding. And I guess with that, give developers detailed recommendations. Developers will hate it if you just send them a metric and say, improve this, because they're going to have to do a lot of investigating. Whereas we as SEOs, if we go into it in a lot more detail and show them why, that's going to be kind of the best solution for everyone. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that, Charlie. We've actually had a question as well. I would just say, I know a couple of you mentioned having a bit of issue with the presentation quality. Sorry about that if it's a bit glitchy. Like I said, the slides and the recording will be up tomorrow, and also it seems that there might be a setting change which might help. But my apologies for that. But yeah, also Charlie, we've had a question actually which is specifically for you. I was going to wait till the end, but we might as well bring it up now. Regarding cumulative layout shift, wanting to understand whether all elements need to be static and allocated space on the page. Be good to get into that right now.
So I don't think there's any one size fits all there, because CLS is measured over the whole entire lifespan of the page. I think what I do is go away, test those templates, go through that process, and understand which templates have a particular issue, go into Lighthouse and see what's causing them. I don't, layout shift. Not all layout shift is bad, but definitely by doing that investigative process, I think you'll be able to get an idea of which layout shift is causing those poor scores. I think layout shift is something that it's a fairly new metric as well, and I think it's something that people will become more knowledgeable over time.
Great. I hope that answers that question. Spot on. Well, yeah, thanks for that, Charlie. That's I'll remove you from this just for now and bring Greg in. Morning, Greg.
Hello.
You right?
I am
just
very
share
well.
with me as well. I'll pop that up now.
There we go.
Excellent. And there we go.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Ooh, screen set.
It's all right. Cool. Can you see my presentation full screen now?
All good.
Awesome. Cool. Cheers, Adam, man. So yeah, today I will be talking about future-proofing your paid search. So this talk is going to be pretty PPC heavy, and even within that, it's going to be pretty paid search heavy. But hopefully, if you don't really work with these channels, there is still going to be something that you can take away, and potentially even ask your paid media team or your paid media agency and maybe challenge them on a few of the things which I'm going to be talking about and things to look forward to in 2021 to make sure that we're safeguarded against kind of, all these unprecedented times and also new updates that Google will be bringing to Google Ads, as well as kind of what's happened over the last year. And if you're one of my clients and you feel like I'm not doing that, please feel free to send me an angry email asking why. And if you're not, please just challenge whoever's running your paid media account and make sure that they're kind of ready for the future and kind of any updates which happen. Cool. So just a little bit about me first. That tired looking fellow on the right is me. I'm Greg. I've had over 3 years experience in paid media, specializing predominantly in search, display and video, and general paid strategy. Speaker at a few conferences, both local and national, and a bit of a self-brag, manager in the PPC team at Impression, which was recently named Best Large PPC Agency in Europe, PPC Agency of the Year, and Biddable Team of the Year, according to various award ceremony people. None of which you had in-person ceremonies, so really, what's the point anyway? So today I will be talking about a few things. First, I'll be taking a look back at kind of what's changed within PPC over the last year or so, as well as maybe a future look at things that could be changing in 2021 and kind of my predictions for them. Following that, I'm going to be talking about how to structure your search campaigns kind of at the moment based on what's changed, as well as maybe a couple of structure tactics and maybe optimization tactics to safeguard against those changes, which we're likely to see kind of coming over the next few months or the next year or so. And then a lot of what I talk about is kind of embracing a lot of smart structures and automated structures. So how to optimize in that structure, which can be a little bit more of a challenge than your kind of the manual bidding and the manual target adjustments that we might be used to in paid search. So first of all, look at what's changed kind of over the past year or so and kind of what's going to be happening. Or if you work in PPC, asking why you might not be able to see your search queries. So one of the main things which has happened recently in PPC is there were changes to the search terms report. So Google made changes so that you can only see search queries which have amassed a significant amount of clicks on that particular query. So this is quite important for PPCers, so we can see what people are searching to actually click on our ads. At the moment, we can only see around 80% of click searches actually visible, and the amount of visible impressions, or how often our ad is shown, is even less. So this is quite difficult as it raises questions around negative keyword management and keyword mining. So something we do quite often is go into the search query report and make sure that the keywords we're bidding on and the search queries we're showing for are actually relevant, and we're not kind of wasting our budget and it's being allocated efficiently. A screenshot there at the bottom, a very quick example of me looking at the search term reports, and only 17,000 out of 21,000, so around 80% of those clicks are actually visible for me to look at. And the amount of impressions even less than that. So that raises a couple of questions about kind of how we optimize towards, you know, new converting queries and how we make sure that our budget's being allocated efficiently. So there's a couple of things that we can do here. First of all, we need to stop focusing and relying on small variances in search terms to drive splitting strategy. Those 20% of keywords which aren't showing are likely keywords, search queries, are likely search queries which only generate kind of like one click or one impression every now and then. So focusing on those small variances and trying to target them is probably not the best use of your time, as those search queries are only going to come up once in a blue moon. So instead, we need to use that 80% to guide our strategy, focus more on the context, the audiences, and the keyword themes that we are seeing to drive growth instead. We need to use it to understand our audience, and then if we understand our audience, then our keywords should be relevant, and all search queries that we get should therefore be kind of relevant following that. And anything which is irrelevant and still significantly impacting your account in that you're losing money, that's going to have more than a few clicks, so it should still be significant to show in your search reports for now. So, you know, there is kind of that backup if you are still worried about that. But hopefully, if you understand your keyword themes and what's coming through in your audience, then everything that you're seeing in that search query report should be relevant. Another large change which has happened kind of periodically over the last few years is that phrase and exact keyword match types are no longer what they say they are. So exact match no longer exact, and phrase match is no longer really phrase. So Google have brought in close variants recently, which previously used to be plurals and misspellings to make it easier for us, so we didn't have to type in every single target every single misspelling of our brand name, for example. But now those close variants are more kind of intent focused. So if Google deems one search query to have the same intent as your keyword, so for example, trainers and sneakers could be of the same intent, then it will start to show those keywords. What that essentially means is those match types are being brought closer to broad match. This makes the traditional kind of split match type campaign an ad group, so splitting campaigns by exact match and broad match. If you work in PPC, you know exactly what I mean. Then that kind of method is a little bit more difficult and could possibly not even be worth it going forward. So we need to start to get prepared for keyword match types to become even more interchangeable in the similarity or irrelevant entirely. The screenshot below showing the close variants from exact match and phrase match, so you know those close intents, making up already around 20% of the searches in this account already, and I only see this kind of going further. Next, audience targeting for search. So when I say you need to understand your audience, I mean both the context as well as literally using data to understand your audience. So obviously we've been able to integrate in-market affinity and custom combined audiences into search for a while now. We need to start using and start creating data-rich first-party audiences to determine the best way to integrate these third-party audiences in market and affinity audiences into our campaigns. So when you create a first-party audience, you can look at the audience report, which I've shown on the right here, and you can see that people who are in that audience, the example here being converters, which kind of third-party outbound audiences they're more likely to be in. So users who have converted on this particular product are 7 times or 6.9 times more likely to be in the audience home security, 6.4 times more likely to be in the dishwashers in market audience. So using that, you can find, you can give yourself more tangible data to work with by integrating them with your campaigns. And you can also look at it contextually, finding like who is more likely to convert, who might be more kind of looking at the informational side of things. If you're looking a bit kind of further up the funnel, PPC is naturally quite a bottom of the funnel campaign anyway. So being able to segment them and kind of maybe integrate it in a negative way into your campaigns to make sure you're not wasting your budget on those users who aren't likely to convert at that particular touch point. And you can, from there, you can then target and expand based on the behavior of users rather than those small variances in search terms, which I mentioned we won't be able to see much kind of at the moment, and probably even more so in the future. And again, as keywords become more vague, this could prove even more vital to make sure that we've got these integrated with our campaigns. And I believe that in the future, keywords will kind of become more irrelevant, and maybe, who knows, in a few years, search might be used. You might target search in the same way we target display and video, for example, and audiences will be the primary method of targeting rather than keywords. Further in the future, but for now, it's still becoming more vague. So we need to look at audiences a lot more often, both in terms of PPC and contextually as well. Responsive search ads and the death of the ETA. So RSAs aren't particularly new, but they're becoming, and already are, kind of the primary method of ads and split testing. So as Google start to give us less visible data, split testing ads traditionally could become harder, and we need to know what it takes to make a good ad. So providing this information into the little bit of a black box that is RSAs, responsive search ads, on Google could actually be our best bet, with data being used to determine what our best ad actually is. On the right here, I can see that Google has shown the find a local heating engineer more often than it's shown the manufacturing in the UK, signifying that that is a better ad. Contextually, as someone who works on the account, I'm not surprised that people are more interested in finding a local heating engineer than, you know, where their boiler is created in the UK. It's not as relevant to them. So we still need to provide kind of like the human emotion and the creativity into writing those headlines, and then we give that information to Google, who puts the right combinations in front of the right user at the right time. And finally, automation. So I couldn't talk about future-proofing without talking about automation. It's here to stay. We need to learn to embrace it. We need to work with it, not against it. But we also need to make sure that we don't submit entirely to it. So what I mean by this is we need to use the information we've got on those audiences in those previous few slides, and our knowledge of the actual product ourselves to guide a smart bidding strategy to achieve the KPI, instead of spending hours adjusting targeting and manual bids like we might used to. But also need to make sure that we don't just entirely just put one large smart bidding strategy on the entire account and leave it. We need that human aspect. We need to use that time saved through all the manual adjustments to be used on improving the accounts through context, finding the right audiences, expanding into new areas like display and video, to drive more volume for a strategy that we know works through putting the right kind of smart bidding on the right campaign for the right KPI at the right time. Cool. So a lot of changes have happened. A lot of changes are going to happen. How do we structure our search to deal with those changes successfully? So if you take one thing from this talk, it is the word data first. We need to make data first campaign structures. So by this, I mean, instead of, we need to consolidate our campaign structures, and instead of splitting by match type or device, for example, we need to segment more by like product category or KPIs, so that we can leverage those smart bidding strategies on each individual area. Our ad groups then need to be split more by keyword context rather than match type again, so that we focus on the intent of the keyword and how to deliver the right ad and page to it, appropriate audiences in to improve our CPA and ROI going forward. So a quick example of what this might look like. So before, you probably, if you work on PPC, you're probably familiar with this structure, a manual bidding structure with campaign split by match type or device. We want to start phasing this out and bring in a smart bidding consolidated campaign into it. Obviously, I appreciate this depends on kind of the context of the account. It might not be always relevant. For example, there might be a particular location which you want to target separately, and there might be one keyword in particular that you want absolute top visibility for. But generally, we want to start phasing these out and creating these data-rich, data-dense campaigns that we can use in conjunction with smart bidding strategies. So for an example of this is, instead of having my my tractors campaign split out by exact, I've got one product area and then different variations of that keyword, and another product area, combine harvesters. I don't actually know anything about combine harvesters, so I apologize if there's no such thing as whatever these are, and focus on that as its own separate KPI rather than kind of keyword match types and devices. Then audience-centric targeting, I talked about layering these in. We need to identify those target audiences by looking at our first-party audiences, like I did a few slides ago. Analyze the user behavior from those once they're integrated into our campaign, create similar and lookalike audiences based off that, and start again. We need to always be looking, start looking as audiences as a primary method of targeting as well as keywords. Cool. So I talked about data density and smart bidding. So why do we want data density for smart bidding? So obviously there's hundreds of thousands of user factors for every single search in an auction. It's not just the keyword that you're bidding on, it's stuff like time of day, day of the week, location, device, audience lists, even things like operating system, the browser that you're using. All of these factors Google will take into consideration when it decides who shows where on the page in the auction. So if you've got consolidated campaigns and more data in smaller areas, then Google will have more of these user factors to optimize towards to determine the best bid to achieve the KPI which you input. So those KPIs which I talk about could be essentially one of two things: a visibility-based KPI or a performance-based KPI. So a visibility-based KPI might use a strategy like maximize clicks, which achieves as many clicks as possible within the given budget, or target impression share, which looks at achieving a certain impression share, so how often you show at a certain point of the page, a certain amount of time, or a performance-based strategy such as target CPA/target ROAS, where you input a certain KPI and Google tries to leverage those bids and all that data to achieve the KPI that you put in. So for example, you want to achieve a £10 CPA, Google will bid more aggressively on users who've shown historical factors to be more likely to convert, and it will bid less aggressively on the opposite. Maximize conversions as well is another example of this, where you achieve as many conversions within your given budget as possible, which is particularly useful if you've got a budget limited campaign. So after all of that, what does our example campaign structure look like? So here we've got our account split by non-brand and brand. So our non-brand campaign tractors, we've got a target CPA strategy on that. We've got some keyword themed ad groups on that. So big tractors includes a keyword like huge tractors with kind of both match types in. And then hopefully our RSA or our expanded text ads will be relevant to both of that because it's the same intent behind the keywords. And then that's going to the most relevant URL. Easy to manage and efficient, and it works well with smart bidding strategies. Cool. So how does this affect those changes that I talked about in the PPC landscape? So grouping our match types together due to lack of variance between the match types. Grouping similar keywords eliminates unnecessary double serving and diminishing data. If we know our audience, then grouping similar keywords together in ad groups can mean that we focus our efforts on writing engaging ad copy. And then our data-dense campaigns and ad groups provide Google with the data to do the work, so we can focus our efforts more on the contextual tasks, which are ever increasing in their importance for PPCers. A couple of other things about safeguarding against further changes in keywords. So exact match you've changed. Let's start integrating DSA campaigns to capture high intent keywords without having to navigate all the different changes in keyword match types that we're likely to see, even more so. Automated strategies start learning about which queries to optimize towards now. So shocks to queries, search query reports, like we had recently, shouldn't be as much of a shock in the future. And then rich first-party audiences to know kind of which audiences to target your ads to in the first place. So smart bidding and smart structures can be a little bit of a difficult one to optimize towards because you don't make the adjustments yourself. So there's a couple of things that you can do to optimize a strategy within a smart structure. And this involves kind of changing the KPI which you put on certain campaigns. So for example, we've got non-branded campaigns on a target CPA strategy of £10. If we're for those keywords or ad groups or campaigns which are achieving a CPA of better than £10, then we might want to give it a more lenient target CPA. So let's say £20, so it bids more aggressively, but we know that those users naturally will have a lower CPA, so we'll still get that target of £10, but we'll just get more conversions for it. And then the opposite, if it's more, if it's not quite achieving our target, we might want to put an even lower target CPA, so the bidding is a little bit more constrained and it limits the amount of exposure that they get but hopefully that should bring it down to £10. So you can still achieve that acceptable performance without spending too much, but still getting conversions at the same time. A couple of considerations. Be wary if you move to target impression share and maximize click strategies, because they can inflate your max cost per click, especially maximize clicks. So just be wary of moving from performance to visibility without kind of considering it first. Another way that you can react with an automated strategy, so the scenario here being a short spike, for example, Black Friday, which is in a couple of days. Hopefully you'll all have your strategies already sorted out for this, but if not, maybe this could be one. So for example, here, if you're expecting conversion rate to double over a short period of time, halve your expectation. So if you're achieving a £10 CPA and you're expecting your conversion rate to double, then change your target CPA to £20. So Google is more aggressive with the bidding, but as your conversion rate is double, then you should be achieving double the amount of conversions at that £10 CPA, if that makes sense. And then following that, put it back to normal or even more strict than before, so it levels out a little bit after that. Yep, and the final one, you need to halve or double your budget. So consider switching your strategy to something that maximizes within a constrained budget. So if you halve your budget, then maybe move to maximize conversions or clicks to try and get the same amount, whilst considering CPC being lower in a constrained budget. Or if you're trying to grow and you're doubling, if you're not already on target CPA, then moving from maximize strategy to a target CPA strategy can make sure that your CPAs and your cost per clicks don't wildly inflate when your budget does. So there's a couple of methods there that you can use to optimize your smart strategy, which you might not be used to because we've been, for years and years in PPC, we've been doing those manual bids ourselves. And then a bonus slide, reacting to changes in pandemic. So when I talk about future-proofing, obviously, we need to consider this. So just outside of PPC, a couple of things that we can do to kind of react to this. Keep an eye on Google Trends. So keep an eye on a returning market if you're not currently there. Look at Performance Planner. So get an idea of what you could achieve for your keywords, which you've already got in your account. Keep an eye on competitors using your Auction Insight tab. Make sure that any budgets that you do have the headroom to kind of increase if you're looking to re-enter the market at more time, and consider the right bid strategy to use. So if you're using a very limited launch, then you might want to do a maximize conversions or a maximize click strategy. Check your audiences. So, you know, like I mentioned, make sure you're targeting the right audiences in the right context. And be reactive with your ad copy to be either sensitive to a situation or maybe be opportunistic of other things, for example. So I appreciate there's a lot of information there. I've gone a little bit over, I apologize. But hopefully there's some good insights there that you can take and maybe think about future-proofing your paid strategy, especially with kind of in light of both the general world at the moment as well as any changes being brought out as they ever are by Google over the next kind of few months.
Great. Oh. Thanks, Greg. That's really good. We've got a couple of questions here, which I think specifically for you. And then there's one that I'll hold back for both yourself and Payout. The first one is here about Amazon and if they're going to kind of follow the same path as Google, in your opinion, with kind of intent-focused keywords.
So Amazon is kind of more of a shopping-based thing. So this is so Amazon will look at feed aspects rather than keyword aspects. So in terms of intent, the way that shopping works is Google tries to filter out by intent anyway, because you don't actually target keywords themselves. So are they going to follow the same path as Google? I would say arguably they're kind of, with the channel that they're using, which is more shopping, they already are more intent focused in themselves. Amazon do also have a bit of a weird model where obviously Google, like, you know, the end of the game is to make money, but Amazon are quite aggressive with it in that the way that they work with paid strategy, it impacts your organic strategy as well, which is quite difficult. So it could be a difficult one, but I would say arguably they're already more intent focused because it's a different channel than Google search, which is what kind of the majority of that talk was about.
Cool. And then one other one, I think it's quite a tough question, but I'll put it to you anyway. Yeah, what would you recommend someone says to their agency to make sure that they've future-proofed their PPC strategy? It's tough.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I would say, like, maybe ask them about kind of what they're doing in regards to updates that Google have made. And if you want a couple of lines to use, ask them what they think the impact of search query reports will have on the account and kind of how they're structuring their keywords within an account. Talk about data density. This is like, again, like I said, if there's one thing that you take from this talk, it's going to be data density. So if you're asking your agencies how to make sure they future-proofed it, ask if keywords become redundant tomorrow, and keyword match types become redundant tomorrow, what is our account going to look like? If they've split it in the traditional way and keyword match types become redundant tomorrow, then they could be a bit screwed. If they've got a consolidated data first, kind of a smarter structure in the campaigns, then hopefully they should be fine. So ask them those questions. If this happens tomorrow, what's going to happen to our account? If they say don't worry about it, if they stutter and sweat, then you might have to ask a few more questions about that and kind of question kind of what the strategy is.
Great, good stuff. Thanks, Greg. Well, yeah, I'll remove you for now and I'll bring payout in. Hi, payout, and hi, payout screen. Perfect. Oh, and I'll remove myself. Oh, I think you're just on mute, actually, payout.
Sorry. Awesome. No better way to kick off a work from home live stream without a technical glitch. So I think that's checked off for this one. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time out to be here today. I think just a little bit before the talk that Greg gave us about PPC nicely kind of leads into what we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss what we've seen in 2020, looking at in hindsight with a little more clarity around how things shaped up. And then what do we expect in terms of media, marketing, and what should our plans for 2021 have in terms of top considerations and changes that we should be taking forward from this year on into our 2021 plans. A quick intro before we dive in. I'm Payal. I've been at Google for 7 years now, and a large chunk of this I worked with US omni-channel retailers, and very similar to what your PPC team at Google does, at Impression does. I at Google help these retailers direct the most of their media spend. And a year after that, I worked on brand advertising, focusing in on YouTube. A good chunk of this talk is also going to dive into YouTube today, and a lot of that comes from my previous role at Google. And currently, I'm an agency development manager working with Impression. Our agenda for today is looking at things in three aspects of what 2020 looked like. One is the consumer journeys that we saw and how they evolved through 2020. Second, to see how businesses actually pivoted to this change and evolved themselves to meet the changing consumer demand. And then third, to look at how platforms, ad platforms, and platforms and engagement itself evolves through the year. And baking all of these three in, we look at the key considerations that you can keep in mind as you're planning 2021. For the first piece, let's see how consumer journeys evolved in 2020. Through this year, we saw online purchase shares increase across all demographic groups through the lockdown. While we're saying this was consistent in high double digits across each of these demo groups, we saw a larger chunk of the change actually coming in from the older demographic groups. So previously, while we were talking about purchase share itself increasing across the board, we also saw a lot of upper funnel changes in engagement in demographic groups 45 plus. And this is a very key insight to take for businesses, because this means that this was a chunk of audiences and business critical buyers that used to primarily come in store, and they're changing the way they buy this year around. They are moving online first because of lockdown and restrictions, etc. So this is also presenting a need to adapt to this new consumer base. And I think parts of this might speak to Charlie's talk a little bit earlier, where we're talking about better online experiences, and parts of it also speak to marketing plans and for the year to come. Secondly, when we looked at the growth that we're seeing across the board, and we looked at a lens that was not demographics essentially, but where is this growth coming from? Which stage of the funnel are they at? What are people researching? Interestingly, we saw that across these categories, like comparing cost, deciding between options, discovering ideas, we were seeing growth across all of these areas. And to me, all of this stepping back is a representation of, everything that people essentially did in store, they had to adapt to doing online. And this represents that growth in buying behavior itself. Looking at something that's closer in the 2020 gamut of things, the holiday season, we're 2 days away from Black Friday. And this was again a very critical period because on one hand, businesses that suffered through the lockdown, etc., are looking to turn around profits. There was a massive change in the way earnings evolved through the year. There was also a massive change in the way people bought through the year and how their buying patterns changed across categories. So this is stats from a McKinsey research done on 2020 shopping behaviors, and we're seeing that despite 44% of consumers reporting an income reduction this year, 82% plan to spend either the same amount or more than they did last year on holiday deals and events. This struck me as a little interesting because that's not what you expect when, in the scheme of things, we are seeing earnings shrink and people being indoors for the most part. But I think then it also means that what people would have otherwise spent on travel and what they would have otherwise spent on outdoor activities like going to pubs and restaurants, I think a lot of this is now getting channeled into gifting and giving to friends, to families, to communities. And an interesting nugget again is to giving back to themselves. We saw a 700 million views on giving and gifting to self this year on YouTube, which is a very first. So this is how people have chosen to pamper themselves through the year. On the flip side of this, something that's slightly concerning is that only 12% intend to stick with the same retailers that they shopped with last year. This is showing shrinking loyalty and a propensity to try new products, try new places to buy at. So this is something that you should probably keep an eye out for and just kind of form in your audience strategy, as Greg mentioned a bit earlier. Now, having covered off the consumer trends, let's look at business trends and pivots that businesses had to make in 2020. Here's what you can't expect for the rest of 2020, having seen a large chunk of it already played out. In 2019, last year, we saw 43% of all Christmas shopping was done in store. That's something we can't expect this year. Retail is now a very digital first sort of platform. And if 57% of overall Christmas shopping was done online last year, we're expecting that to accelerate further. And to kind of get a sense of what that, the extent of that acceleration could be, is through the course of this year, that is up until now 2020, we've seen that all retail purchases has grown from 17 to 30%. And this is being represented by the explosion of online shopping and demand on Google for all things retail. Now, if we're seeing this growth, we're seeing it mostly happen online. Obviously, that's challenged businesses in a sense of how they actually execute their sales to meet this changing customer need. So we actually looked at a few top categories. We looked at consumer electronics, home and garden, and fashion, and we bucketed another chunk here. And on another segment, we saw how buying behavior changed for three groups of people. One was people who always buy offline. Second, people who buy channel agnostic, which is people who buy online and offline based on availability of choice, pricing, etc. And then third, people who mostly buy online. Interestingly, people who always buy offline, we saw a decrease across the board, across each of these categories. And across the board, we also saw an increase in people who are buying across channels and were channel agnostic in their behavior. We saw massive increases in each of these areas. Whereas people who almost always bought online only stayed fairly consistent to their buying behavior. That was a very interesting shift. We saw a lot of businesses choosing to go omni-channel that were traditionally just offline only. This is something that has been forced by the way the pandemic played out. Jumping ahead, looking at a third element of the change that we saw in 2020. How did audience engagement evolve to respond to this change? A bit of a disclaimer here, I'm going to be very stats and data heavy, and I'm going to look at specific Google platforms, though I think they are fair representations of things we saw across the board, experiencing things together, though in isolation. We saw watch time increase on YouTube by 27%. And I'm sure that's across the board, whether that's Netflix, Disney Plus, or any other streaming channel. Everyone was very tuned into content, and I think a similar thing reflected on our side on YouTube as well. Second, in terms of the content that came across on these platforms, we saw a lot of more human, engaging content of people wanting almost company virtually. So here are some of the top themes of content that we saw through the course of this year. We saw people who wanted to do study with me videos, a massive explosion on YouTube in terms of content. We saw people turning to YouTube for cooking help and recipes, etc. So pantry meals was another category of content that saw a massive amount of growth. And then coping techniques and at-home workouts represents people who are actually looking for meditation videos and trying to stay on top of their wellness, mental and physical, through the course of the pandemic. And then, interestingly, the very few businesses that were actually present online through these high engagement periods also saw that they were tuning into a platform at a time people were also tuned in. So here's a quick nugget of research that was conducted through the peak of the pandemic, which was between March and April. Advertisers saw that their campaigns drove 31% more conversions, and I think that just came from a lot of presence and people on the platform. So in terms of these three segments, I'll just quickly summarize and step back in terms of what your key takeaways should be from 2020 so far, and should ideally inform how you're planning 2021. So one, we saw continuous acceleration of e-commerce. We continue to see it, and a large chunk of it is yet to come with Black Friday and Christmas just around the corner. Then we saw a lot of new audience groups online, and this kind of takes me back to when we discussed how new older demographic groups were coming online. And we saw 9.5 million Silver Surfers that were first-time buyers come online. Then we also saw that through all of this acceleration, online became relevant throughout the journey. So it's even more important now to be present across every stage of the funnel than it was before, because that's where the buyers are, that's where people are, that's where everyone's engaging. And then we also saw this increase in consumption and content online. So if you're a brand who's constantly thinking how to be personal in your advertising, how to connect with audiences real time, then content like this should be something that you should be really looking forward to tuning into. And with this, we look at what your key considerations for planning 2021 should be. I'm imagining a lot of what you're doing right now is extremely search heavy, and we'll maintain that search remains the gateway for purchase decisions. We see people turn to Google to find what they want to look to buy and ideas for new products. But here's another piece of what we see, the other side of the puzzle, which is this 86% still represents only 4% of the time people spend online on Google search, actually looking for what they want to buy. The remaining 96% of the time, they're actually just browsing the internet outside of search across websites, YouTube, Gmail, social networks, and they're not discoverable on search at that time, at that specific time. So intent still resides here, but they're getting exposed to a lot of different products to buy in this 96% of their time. And like we discussed today a little bit earlier, which is we're seeing an increase in watch time on YouTube, which is 47%. And there's this growing trend to watch things online and explore more as you go. What you traditionally ran your campaigns as could have looked something like this, right? Which is, let's say your search campaigns are targeting 100 users on Google search based off of a keyword strategy and all of that you can inform in that campaign. Assuming 10% of them actually click through to your website, that represents 10 visits on your website. And a bit of a disclaimer here, a 10% click-through rate is very high to expect. So definitely don't set those benchmarks for the agencies that you work with. But if they're delivering that, that's stellar results. let's assume 10% of the people, these 10 visitors that actually came to your website, 2 of them actually converted on your website. And that's assuming there's a 20% conversion rate, still a very high conversion rate to expect, but impressive nonetheless. This entire flow, which is what typically your 2020 campaign could look like, represents what's happening right now. And here's what's essentially being missed. It's this chunk of people that are essentially qualifying as buyers or users or have qualified intent to buy the product or service that you sell, but even though they don't come onto your website, you still have a chance to reach this untapped market and consumers and re-engage with audiences that came onto your website. One, you can tap into this untapped market through in-market consumers. And secondly, you can also, like Greg mentioned, have a very informed audience strategy that takes care of this. And here you can use a lot of your first-party audiences and website tagging, etc., to meet these targeting needs. What I'm largely saying, stepping back from all of this, is you've got search that's running the show to a large extent, and that's great. But it, along with YouTube, what it brings is it brings in a lot of sight, sound, and motion that basically helps drive purchase decisions. And it does this at a tremendous scale. So the audience that you actually missed out on within your search campaign could also be the audiences you're still able to reach out to and target on YouTube. Here's another targeting tactic that I'm a really big fan of, which is custom intent audiences. And what it essentially does is it looks at the very niche audience group that you can create, looking at the same keywords in your search campaigns, the same search terms in there, and target them on YouTube. So if these 86% of people who turn to Google for what to buy and where to buy, and let's say you miss them, and they've not actually clicked through to your ad, you still have a chance to re-engage with them on YouTube. And this time you have sight, sound, and motion to help them activate and buy your product. That's a very powerful targeting tool, a fairly new one, I'd say a year and a half back. So I definitely rely on this to re-engage with the audiences that you missed out on. So to amplify your search, if you add on video, here's some benchmark results that you can expect. In terms of running search and video parallelly, we saw that it led to an 8% higher search conversion volume. We also noticed that it advanced search conversion rate by 3%. And that's interesting because then it's not essentially just a search ad that you're showing your user, it's then engaging with them across the funnel. So it is increasing the likelihood of conversion. And then overall, because these two pieces are speaking to each other and there's a lot of media efficiency driven from that exchange, we saw 4% lower CPAs. And then I hear this as a question that comes across a lot from brands, essentially two questions, one being what to expect in terms of results, second to be creative. In terms of what you can expect for results from a YouTube campaign, if you're targeting the right scale of audiences, targeting the right audiences and giving the structures sufficient time to ramp up, what we saw is that globally more than half of the TrueView for Action campaigns saw roughly similar CPAs to non-brand search campaigns. So essentially, this should be like a generic search campaigns, except you're reaching out to users, sight, sound, and motion, and that does come at an incremental cost in what upper funnel engagement looks like. So what I'll leave you with is, if search captures people and demand and intent, video moves people. So I think especially going into 2021, what you should look at evolving is touching the full sense of opportunity that you have and leveraging the both best of search, which I'm sure the PPC team of ad impressions already helping you uncover, but also adding on nuggets of video to help you extend the reach of those campaigns. With that, thank you, everyone.
That was amazing. Thank you, Pa. That was great. I'll just bring the rest of the gang in here. Cool. We've just run by a couple of minutes, but pretty good, really. Just say as well, I've just dropped a link in there, everyone, to just a quick form that we're running, a marketing census. It takes 5 minutes to fill out and got the chance of winning some Amazon vouchers. Really appreciate if you could help us fill that out. That'd be great. And there's one more question from Barry earlier that I kept back for Payal and Greg, I think, and it's should business be worried about keywords becoming redundant, and how do we protect our spend if that's the case?
Yeah, I think. Oh, I'm getting a bit of an echo actually. But I don't think that keywords are going to become redundant in the near future. I think maybe eventually, in a few years, they might be. Google probably know a little bit more about that than me. But however, what we should be worried about is the differences between keyword match types and the intent of keywords becoming kind of interchangeable and almost irrelevant. So if you ask how we protect our spend, again, bringing it back to that data density, if we have our keywords within kind of, a data first structure, and we've already got smart strategies learning what users are going to be, which users are going to be converting depending on who they are and what they search, then the kind of the interchangeability of keywords that already is and is already going to become, if we've already got our strategies learnt what converts, then that happening isn't going to impact our spend too much, and it should mean that performance kind of carries on as it is and probably even gets better as the visibility of differences between keywords becomes more irrelevant. And in the future, the distant future, if keywords do ever become irrelevant, then if you've already got this set up, then your campaign has already learned and it already knows who's going to convert. So if they do become redundant, if you're proactive about the strategy and the structure that you use, then you should be kind of safeguarded against, or your campaign should be future-proofed against any changes which might happen to keywords in the future.
Yeah, great. Sounds good to me. Anything to add to that, Payal?
Sorry. Yeah, I think just to what Greg said, we can't really predict if keywords will ever go out of a regular campaign structure. But I think just based on what we shared now, we're doing keywords on YouTube. We're using search keywords for YouTube. So what's essentially going to happen is that there's going to be execution being a bit more platform agnostic, where you're going to be able to re-engage with search keywords on YouTube and vice versa. And then there's going to be this zooming out, like Greg mentioned, which is going to be, performance is not going to decline, but it's still going to get powered by smart bidding and bits like that. So, the finer details will stop mattering, and that level of attention to maybe little bits like that might change to, like Greg said, across platforms, to execute across platforms and against those larger business goals that you have.
Yeah, great. And Charlie, can you see the chat there, Charlie? Because there's a question, but it's sort of 4 parts and quite a lot to it. But I'll try and bring kind of the core.
Yeah, I can't see the chat.
That's okay. It's coming back to kind of core web vitals and saying that they're a new metric, and we don't really know how they're going to be affecting individual users. But if you're working on redesign at the moment, you need to understand kind of how to take those metrics in, and would it be good practice to leave that allocated space on the page without calculating for kind of those metrics and that data?
Yeah, so a couple of parts there. So the first bit, I think that the metrics are new, and I don't think they're going to be a massive ranking factor. I don't think, when these things are being rolled out, sites are going to go down, toilet effectively. Some of these sites, the big publishers are not going to punish them massively, are they? In terms of making space for it when you're doing the redesign, definitely kind of, make sure that you have those metrics front and center. And to do that, because you're not going to be able to have field data when you're building the site, make sure that you use PageSpeed, the in-house Lighthouse tester in Chrome. So when you go away on that dev site, open up Chrome and keep testing those URLs in the Lighthouse tool, just to see, even though it is a lab test, that you can get a good idea, if anything, if you are matching those core web vitals when you're doing that build.
Right. Excellent. Unless there's any more questions for anyone today, that probably wraps us up. Just a few minutes over schedule, but great stuff there from all 3 talks. So I hope we've kind of given some insights and posed some of the right questions to help you all kind of plan for what's going to be a very eventful year ahead. So we'll wrap it up there. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks Payal for coming on, and Charlie and Greg too. It was great. And I'll leave you all to the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.